Yes. Can everyone hear me okay?
Sure.
Awesome. Thank you for bringing in some Hugh Masekela and Mariam Makeba into today's session. We're really thrilled to host today's leadership conversation, Women's Way of Leading, Part 2. This conversation is in partnership with the New York Community Trust Leadership Fellows and Women's eNews. And we're proud to bring you this program as a sequel to our initial conversation about women's way of leading. Today's conversation will feature Sokol, Mariam Jalabi, Sharon Nelson, and Taina Bien-Aimé. We'll discuss important traits of women leaders and the presence of the qualities that they bring to leadership, not just in the nonprofit sector, but in every aspect of our lives. In a few minutes, I will introduce today's panelists, but before I do that, I wanted to provide a frame for today's conversation and comments. I'm coming to you, obviously, from outside of Exalt's headquarters in 17 Battery Place in Manhattan. Today was our first day back in person in the office with our entire staff. An exciting day, but also a stressful day, full of anxiety and many twists and turns. But today was a success, and a huge reason why today was a success was because of the leadership of our executive director, Giselle Castro. In a few minutes, I will invite our executive director to come up and join me to say a few words about how she has led as a Latina, as a New Yorican woman, and how she brings those traits to make sure that Exalt is successful. But before I do that, I just wanted to say that today was an emotional day in many ways. In March of 2020, we stepped foot outside of our office and we did not know when we would return. We left unsure about what this pandemic was, what its impact would be, and how we would continue to serve the court-involved youth who are at the heart of our mission. We knew when we left our offices in March of 2020 that we would need to continue to be strong, to push forward, to strive for the young people of Exalt, because we knew that their needs would continue to be exacerbated by a global crisis, one in which none of us had ever seen the likes of. But when we think of the impact that this pandemic and its economic and equity fallout have had on each of our lives, we know that that impact has been tenfold on the communities that we serve, especially many of our young women. And so in a few minutes, I will ask Giselle to come and join us to speak about how she maintained a vision and how she was able to support staff such as myself to be guided, to be strong, to continue to move toward the light during a very dark and difficult time throughout this crisis. But I can stand before you today to say that we made it. We made it, we're here. And I think it is not an understatement to say that all of us are here in some way, shape, or form because of the power and the vision that women have brought as leaders to all of our lives. I myself am the son of a powerful Black woman who is a corporate leader, a leader in the corporate world. My mother, Maria Green, was one of the first women to lead at the executive level of Fortune 50 company here in the United States as a Black woman, Illinois Toolworks in Chicago, where I grew up. I'm also very fortunate, in addition to being raised by a powerful Black woman who is a general counsel of a Fortune 50 company, to be married to a state senator, Senator Summer Brook, who brings a vision of Black women leadership to the state Senate from New York 55th District as the first Black woman to hold that seat in history, and the first woman of Ethiopian descent to hold that seat in history. And so to paraphrase Tupac, we all get our game from women, we all get our name from women. And I am honored and proud to follow in the footsteps of and to support the leadership of powerful women such as Giselle Castro, who I will now bring up to share a few remarks. So please join me in welcoming our Executive Director at Exalt Youth, Giselle Castro.
This is a lot of women. Congratulations to everyone. And as Brian said, today is a day that we're celebrating women's leadership. And of course, every day, in my opinion, is a day to celebrate women who lead, not just in organizations, New York City, and their families. And we understand what it means to be a woman, especially nowadays, as Brian was saying, returning back during COVID. But first, I want to thank Michael for giving me also this opportunity. It was not in our agenda. We're closing out in the nonprofit sector, as all of you know. June 30th is the end of our year, our fiscal year. July 1 is the day that we return back to a brand new year. And we're doing this with such grace. We're doing this by bringing in all New Yorkers to help all of our young people move forward in a very, very delicate time. And tonight, on a Monday, you will all have a moment to think through, to plan what it is, how you're going to move forward here in New York City, but more specifically, thinking about I'm sure reflecting on your careers, reflecting on how we're going to create a new world order. I'm not going to say too much this evening because I know that you have a full agenda, but it is a privilege, it is an honor to just say thank you to each and every one of you from the bottom of my heart. We are making a difference, and as we all know, I don't have to say it myself as a woman, that it takes so many of us to create and to empower change. So thank you all so much. Happy Monday. It is, according to the Zoom virtual platform, 6:12. I always like to tell the time, not as if we don't know what time it is, but it is to ground us. It is to say that in a few hours, hopefully, we will close out this evening with a good idea of what our summer is going to look like and how we're going to keep this wonderful city thriving. So once again, congratulations to all of you. And I'm seeing a lot of men as well. So I'm not going to just to say this is a women's conference, but thank you to everyone. And I'm pivoting back because I'm hearing, a lot of traffic in New York City, to Brian. So thank you for this opportunity. And here goes Brian.
Thank you so much, Giselle. So as Giselle mentioned, this topic is vitally important, not just for women leaders, but for men leaders as well. We're thrilled to see that we have many men and male-identified guests and fellows in attendance tonight. A few years ago, I was asked to give opening remarks to a conversation that Bell Hooks was hosting at the New School. The conversation was called Man Enough. And the conversation featured a panel of men who were asked to talk about how, as men, we could play a critical role in fighting against patriarchy, fighting against sexism, fighting against the oppression and the silencing of women. It is crucially important that men step up, that as Bell Hooks asked us to do in A Will to Change, we fight for the equity of women at every turn, at every chance that we can. In addition to taking the vision, the knowledge, and the leadership that they provide to us and following through on that, it is crucially important that every man fights for equity, fights for justice, for women and for all people, because these are issues that hurt us all. When we think about sexism, misogyny, patriarchy, they hurt not only women, they hurt men. They hurt men in very deep and profound ways. So when you hear from a Giselle Castro, when you hear from some of the leaders you're going to hear from tonight, know that as men, we too have a crucial role to play in advocating for women's leadership. And so now, without further ado, I will introduce our panel of experts. First, we'll have Lori Sokol. Lori is a PhD and the Executive Director of Women's eNews, an award-winning nonprofit digital news service that covers issues of particular concern to women and provides women perspectives on public policy with writers and readers around the globe. Women's eNews audience stretches from New York City to New Delhi, and all points in between, reaching 3.5 million readers every year. Dr. Sokol strives to empower individuals to triumph over gender-related societal limits so they can reach their full potential unhindered. She's done so as a published writer on issues relating to gender equity in such market publications as the Baltimore Sun, the New York Times Business Section, Slate, and as a current regular contributor to the Huffington Post. She's also the author of the award-winning book, She Is Me, How Women Will Save the World. Please give it up for Dr. Sokol.
Hey. Thank you. Thank you. So am I to introduce myself now? Or you gave such a great introduction, I have nothing to add. What would you like me to talk about?
Dr. Sokol, I will introduce the rest of the panelists, and then I'll hand it off to you to give some remarks.
Very good, very good.
Perfect. So our next panelist is Sharon Nelson. Sharon Nelson is the founder and CEO of CREW, Civically Re-Engaged Women, a professional development and political training organization with the flagship Parity Politics and She Rose campaign program, where there is a seat for all leaders at the table. Sharon is a member of the advisory board of the New York State Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission and the president emeritus of the National Women's Political Caucus, NYC, where she reestablished the 46-year-old organization in 2015 after a 10-year hiatus. A political and media entrepreneur, Sharon is an operations, external relations, corporate and political strategist who is certified as a Democratic National Committee finance director. She's worked with several campaigns and administrations, including the historic Nelson Mandela World Tour, the 106th mayor of NYC, Honorable David Dinkins, and the 1992 inauguration of President William Jefferson Clinton. Sharon earned a Bachelor of Science in Public Relations from S.I. Newhouse School of Public Communications at Syracuse University, and she's also a recipient of the prestigious Public Relations Society of America Silver Anvil Award for her contributions to the launching of National Cancer Survivors Day. Please give a hand to Sharon. Next up, we have Taina Bien-Aimé. Taina Bien-Aimé is the executive director of the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women, one of the oldest international organizations dedicated to ending trafficking in women and girls and commercial sexual exploitation as practices of gender-based violence and discrimination. Prior to this position, Taina was the executive director at the Women's City Club of New York, an advocacy organization that helps shape public policy in New York. She is also the founding board member of and later served executive director of Equality Now, a human rights organization that works to promote human rights of women and girls globally. She was the director of business affairs and film acquisitions at HBO, and practiced international corporate law at Wall Street law firm Cleary Gottlieb, Stein, and Hamilton. Taina holds a Juris Doctorate from NYU School of Law and license in political science from the University of Geneva Graduate School of International Studies in Switzerland. And she is a contributor to the Huffington Post and sits on the board of the New York Women's Foundation. Please give it up for Taina. As you can see, we have a prestigious and renowned panel. So we're so excited to hear from our panelists today. I am now going to actually hand it off to Michael.
Wait.
Yes.
We have another panelist that you didn't introduce, Mariam Jalabi.
Yes, I'm so sorry. Mariam. Yes, Mariam Jalabi. Mariam Jalabi is a political activist from Qamishli City. She left Syria in the late 1980s for Canada to join her father, who was a political activist. She graduated from Montreal University, majoring in political science, and studied design and marketing. Jalabi is the representative of the coalition in the United Nations and one of the founders of the Syrian women's political movement. She currently resides in New York City. Mariam works with different NGOs and projects, but her primary focus is representing the coalition at the UN, in addition to her work with SWPM. She co-founded and is now a member of the General Secretariat. She participates in all projects organized by SWPM with external parties and organizations, in addition to her work in other projects related to Syria, such as the Project for U.S. Institution for Peace, which is focused on meeting with as many male and female Syrian citizens from several areas inside Syria as possible, in order to identify the different challenges they face in their efforts to implement their projects. Ms. Jalabi, I deeply apologize. Please give it up for our renowned panelist, Mariam Jalabi. Thank you so much, Dr. Sokol. So I will now actually pass it off to Michael Seltzer, who will moderate the discussion, but we will hear from Dr. Sokol first, who will be providing the opening remarks. And then we will ask each of our panelists to provide some remarks. Michael will have some questions that he's prepared, and he will ask you as follow-ups. But this is a conversation. You know, we welcome the participation of all of our fellows who are here in attendance, any of our guests. I see that some of our faculty from the New York Community Trust Fellowship are also here. We welcome your questions. We welcome your participation. Later on, you will have an opportunity to have some smaller breakout sessions. And then we will conclude the evening with some closing from Shelley and some follow-up from Shelley Ho, our Communications and Knowledge Officer. Thank you again so much for the opportunity to hear from these amazing panelists. And now we'll pass it off to Dr. Sokol. Thank you again so much.
Actually, thank you, Brian. And I know you're juggling a lot today. Lori actually has agreed not only to speak, but to moderate the program, right, Lori?
Yes.
All right. I just want to add, I'm here to help. I just wanted to, for those of you who don't know, Brian, again, is the Deputy Director of New York Community Trust Leadership Fellows. I'm the Director. Shelley is everything to us on so many counts. Just to add quickly for both the men and the women in the room, yes, we should all man up, but we should learn from women with the qualities and the talents that they really have for centuries developed that can inform us as better leaders. So it's a question of both manning up, but also a question of what can we learn from our sisters that will make us better leaders, because they clearly are paving the way. So Lori, without further ado, can I turn it over to you?
Yes, I'd be happy to. And again, first I want to thank our panelists for being here and taking the time: Sharon Nelson, Taina Bien-Aimé, and Mariam Jalabi, three of my favorite people and colleagues. It's always
the feeling is mutual.
Thank you. It's always a joy to invite their commentaries, their ideas, do their experience, their expertise, and in diversity, in some of the areas of diversity, who they represent. So thank you. And to all the attendees who are taking the time to be here tonight as well. Michael, your words, your thoughts are very sincere and very valuable for a number of reasons. Talking about first the problems with patriarchy. In my book, for example, She Is Me, How Women Will Save the World, the point of the book was to bring to light, and Taina Bien-Aimé and Mariam Jalabi are profiled in the book, is to bring to light how the qualities that women not only possess, because men possess them too, but women are free to exhibit in patriarchal societies, like sensitivity, compassion, empathy, introspection, right? Or what, these are the qualities that women as leaders have proven more effective than the qualities that hypermasculine male leaders have exhibited, throughout generations, which tends to bring people only to war and the loss of lives and damage to our planet, etc. So, and we only need to look at what happened during COVID, right? We all alluded to some people, today's their first day back at work after, a year and a half. Although my book came out in August and was finished in February of last year, which was a month before COVID really took over. If we only look at how countries that are led by women managed the epidemic, the pandemic, versus countries led by male hypermasculine leaders, the facts are there. So if we look at New Zealand, Iceland, Taiwan, and Taiwan being so closely located to China, where the virus emanated from, we see that they were more successful, more effective at limiting the impact of the pandemic in their countries on their citizens, thereby limiting the number of cases, the number of lives lost, the impact to the economy, etc., by using these qualities that I mentioned before: empathy, compassion, introspection, sensitivity, etc. For those countries that were led by hypermasculine men, like the US with Donald Trump, I guess, who's, it can be the poster child for hypermasculine leaders, and Putin in Russia and we look at Brazil, they were least effective at limiting the impact of COVID-19. This resistance to accept and acknowledge that this is a dangerous pandemic, a virus that will impact and was already impacting countries, both in terms of health, safety, economy, etc. But the desperate need to hold on to or deny the impact of the virus due to hypermasculine norms, and particularly for Donald Trump, who was concerned it would negatively impact his ability to get reelected, was put before the lives of people and before the lives of their countries. And there's another aspect to this, why it is important for men not only to be allies to gender equality, but to also be more assertive and aggressive in stepping it up, is because what we found, and this is for generations, is that men who ascribe to these hypermasculine roles and pressures, where they're not allowed to cry, right? And they're not allowed to show affection or any kind of emotion or empathy or compassion or real kindness, negatively impacts their health, right? It affects the stress levels, which lead to higher incidence of heart attack and stroke. So that's another reason why it's to their benefit. And lastly, although I'm sure there are many other reasons, if we had equal pay for women, it's not just that women would make more money, right? It's that the families would bring more money into the families, less pressure on the husbands if they are primary, income earner, to have to bear the brunt of the financial responsibility to their families. Why would anyone say, no, I don't want another 20% of, my wife's income. I don't want her to get a 20% raise in her income. It makes no sense. But that is what patriarchy is doing by not, or at least the Senate Republicans in the US are doing by not passing, the ERA to ensure, and equal pay, to ensure that women are getting equal pay. So it affects not only women, but men, families, communities, the country's overall economic impact of the entire country, et cetera. So it makes no sense anymore. And then if we look at when women do serve as leaders, even in corporations and small businesses, those who are given loans for small businesses, and by the way, not only are there more women who receive small business loans, but more women of color than any who receive more small business loans in this country, they are more apt to pay it on time and in full than when men do. So I'll stop there, but these are just some of the reasons why the qualities that women are free to exhibit in this patriarchal society men should also feel free to exhibit them as well, because as I said, everybody will benefit. Now, what would you like me to do? Shall I pass the torch to someone else?
Questions.
Yes. Okay.
But you might start, if you want, with women just telling about their own journey as leaders, if you like.
The women panelists?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Okay, so first let's start with Taina Bien-Aimé, who has a very interesting international background and what brought her to the position that she is now in.
Well, good evening, everyone. And thank you, Lori. Thank you, Michael. Nice to meet everyone. And it's just such an honor to especially speak to the next generation and the upcoming cohort of new leaders. I see little ones behind there. You, Mariam, I have a very young staff. They're all under the age of 35. Most of them are under the age of 26. And so it's important for me to share as much as I can with them and to learn from them. So I'm very, I'm very grateful to be here tonight. And to the older guests as well. So briefly, I am a first generation New Yorker. My parents immigrated from Haiti in the 50s. And I won't go into how I landed in Geneva. My father worked for TWA, which was an airline. There were two major airline companies in the 60s. There was Pan Am and TWA, for those of us who remember that. And so my parents were they were Francophile. They never really got used to the American way of life. They never felt comfortable in the US, although they came here for better opportunities for themselves and their children. And so it turns out that I wound up in Geneva, Switzerland at the age of 10 and stayed there for 14 years. So I did all my studies over there and then came back, realizing that in a conservative country like Switzerland and being a Black woman, it would have been very difficult for me to pursue my dreams. In terms of, since this is a conversation about patriarchy and feminism and women's empowerment, my grandmother was a suffragette. And so from the time I was very, very small, it was clear to me that I had an enormous responsibility, and also as the oldest of three children. And those of you who are from communities of color, especially from immigrant families, you know that the oldest girl has enormous responsibility in the household and elsewhere out in the world. And so it was very important for me to understand, both from my grandmother and all the women in my life, especially my mother, that education was critically important. Independence was clearly important, that I was never to depend on a man, and that I had a responsibility to continue the legacy of equality for women and girls. And so I talk about that a little bit in Lori's book, where until I was an adolescent, my life was around the kitchen table, and I thought that women were absolute authorities and the end all of power and control. And then it was obviously once I started stepping out into the world that I realized that the women I admired so much were being sexually harassed at work. Some of them were battered by their spouses, by their husbands, and that really women were considered second-class citizens in all spheres of the world. And so that is my journey that led me now to working exclusively on issues of women and girls' rights. So I'll just stop here.
Thank you, Taina. And now I'd like to introduce Mariam Jalabi, who's going to turn on her mic.
Yeah, and hear
Yeah,
a few other voices with me. Yes, I'm here.
There you are. Okay. So Mariam, if you could introduce yourself, you have a very unique mission as well in helping women and your people. So if you would tell our attendees who you are and what you do.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's so good to see so many good faces, and I feel the energy of of this group, how committed it is to creating a more equal and equitable world. And I think that's where my life has taken me in, regardless or where we are from and where we come from, and no matter what our age is or gender is, that we are all people who are aware that we are all on a track to create a more just world. And my experience started from when I was in Syria as a little child, and my family had to flee the country, forcefully displaced into the rest of the world. And we went to a lot of different countries where my dad was working, and I ended up being in Canada in the end. And then from Canada, I made the choice actually to come to New York City after a visit and deciding this is the place I need to be. I came down and I was working within the fashion industry, creating clothing that I believed would be more expressive of women's way of being and knowing, because clothing is a language we carry out in the world, and women all over the world are the ones who carry that language so much more strongly. And they are responsible for carrying the culture and religion and everything in the way they dress. And their being in the way they dress so much more than the men. And then when the Syrian revolution started and I became involved in trying to create, this is a country that kind of spit my family out because of the dictatorship that exists there, I became very involved with the people on the ground. And I realized women were actively involved in every aspect of this revolution, but they were not the ones who were sitting at the leadership places. They were not the ones who were making the decisions. So it became very important for me that I become part of groups that were working on creating more space for women, more spaces for leadership for them. So one of the first things that I've started with the Syrian Opposition Coalition as a representative to the United Nations, when they came to me and they said, hey, we want you keep talking about women's inclusion, can you please work with us? And since you're based in New York, can you help us be, part of the representation to the UN? I'm like, yes, sure, of course, with the condition that I also include in my job to include more women in this work. And that's how years later, after a lot of work, we Syrian women have come together and decided that we needed to create a space for women specifically to do politics, because in the world, there is a lot of different elements that just does not make it feasible for women to be part of the political leadership. We live in a very patriarchal world. We live in a very militarized world that does not allow for women to be part of the decision-making process. So we felt that after trying an error of a lot of different tactics of how to become part of the decision-making process for creating more peace in Syria, we started the Syrian Women's Political Movement. And the idea is that we have this space where we support and work and create the network and connect the resources that are usually not present when you're working individually, that if we are part of a group, part of a network, then we can create a much stronger base for women to be involved in leadership positions. And we have succeeded to double, I like saying double the women's participation within the Syria political process, because it used to be about 5 to 6%, and now we are at 14-15%, which I believe is a huge improvement. I'll stop there. I will be very happy to talk a little bit more about what keeps us going as Syrian women later on, and what are some of the lessons we have learned about how we can learn from each other as cisgender women and cisgender men, and this is the dominant huge dominant categorizations in the world, how we can be working together and how we can include others also within this work so that we have more equitable and more equal world for all.
Thank you, Mariam. I'd now like to introduce Sharon Nelson, who I have a specific question, and I have a couple of specific questions, but one very important one is, to what extent do you think the qualities that Mariam just spoke about, that women lend themselves as leaders, the ones that I mentioned, as well as Taina mentioned, to what extent are these qualities evident, would you say, in some of today's male leaders? Because we've been speaking about how they're not evident quite a bit, right? So let's talk about, do you see these qualities evident in any of the male leaders, whether it be nationally, locally, or internationally?
Well, I think that you outlined a range of options there. And because everybody's an individual, I don't like to just sort of broad strokes people. I believe in individualism. I believe in professionalism. And I believe that within all of us, we have a sense of camaraderie and wanting to do the right thing. I would like to believe that. In my 30 years of experience, of course, there are varmints and people who do not do the right thing and benefit from usurping others and taking advantage of situations. But for the most part, I found that most people are reasonable in some way, shape, or form. And the question is, because we're all so complicated and we come from different backgrounds and different life experiences, what is the commonality that we all want? Don't we all want something better for ourselves, our children, our families? So what I like to look at is the commonality factor of what it is that we want, because I think this lends to a better discussion as opposed to what divides us or what are the harmful elements out there. We have, as they say, more things in common than not. So if I can just lend that to the discussion, I think that there's an openness, there's a willingness to learn. Women exhibit this, I think, a little better, but you know, with the millennium coming in 2000 and the competitiveness and women really stepping up and stepping out, I think that the landscape of women have become more competitive and it has become more viable in terms of coming up against men and or competing in a fair ranks with men. The problem that women have with what we are trying to achieve is enforcement. So for example, I will throw out there the conversation, Lori, that you had when you opened up was about women having fair pay and access to equitable fair pay. And I will say this, since 1963, our great President John F. Kennedy on the books created the Fair Wage Act, okay? And this provided this discourse, this discussion for equal pay and fair pay for a job that is done. It wasn't a gender issue. It is what the work is and what is the fair pay for that work rendered. And I would say that every single president since JFK have come up with their own version of this bill, with the exception of Donald Trump, who didn't even bother to address it. The only thing Trump did in terms of acknowledging women was the centennial celebration of the 19th Amendment, which allowed women the right to vote. So, I mean, with all of those other things going on, I mean, President Obama had the Lilly Ledbetter bill. I mean, other presidents have had this, but the question is, why don't they just enforce these executive orders that they passed for decades instead of just recreating the box? It doesn't make any sense.
Exactly, Sharon. It doesn't make sense. So we need to see how we can dig deeper. And actually, I'm wondering, ask men, what are the obstacles? What are the stumbling blocks? What is the concern? You know, I like to say, you know, we don't want revenge, we just want equality. You know, it's not like we're asking for revenge, that we want revenge. But yeah, what is it? Because in every way, economically, emotionally, equality benefits everybody. So why aren't we there? Taina, I'd like to ask you a question. I know you're very humble about yourself, very modest, but I'd like to ask, what is it, what would you say there are some traits that you exhibit that could be beneficial in your leadership, that could be beneficial for men to learn from?
Well, you know, going back to what Sharon was saying about, you know, individualism, and it's true. Like when people asked Martin Luther King, or many other philosophers, like, do you think human beings are born good or are they born evil? And the majority of philosophers will say human beings are born good. But I think we're also, you know, it's all about socialization, for one. So there's a huge cultural component to how we act and how we move in the world. Obviously, there are other issues, you know, socioeconomic, et cetera. But, you know, since we're in the generalization mode, right now, I know things are shifting dramatically and people are trying to raise children differently, and that's very difficult, but it is the way we are socialized, right? So little things, you know, I mean, I remember in the 70s reading Maria Elena Biaggiotti's book on being girls. And, you know, there was this test where they put 3 babies on a bed, pink diaper, blue diaper, and green diaper. And people could not relate to the green diaper unless they peeked into the diaper. So, and we know that language changes, attitudes change the minute you know whether it's a girl or a boy. I mean, now people are having different conversations about that, but so it's and because the socialization is steeped in a system of patriarchy, it's very difficult to extricate all of that from a system that is in our DNA. Like there are very, very few matriarchal or matrilineal societies that have survived. A lot of them were destroyed by colonialism and imperialism. So it's like we have to constantly check ourselves and reinvent ourselves and our communities around it. And the other challenge is that we're tribal. You know, we're very, and that's very, you know, mammal-esque, is that we stick together and we believe that that if we don't stick together, there's a scarcity risk. And so when we talk about, and that could be based on race, you know, racial fears, on ethnic fears, but also on fears based on sex. And so I think when we do have conversations about, you know, men versus women, it's the fear of relinquishing power. It's the fear of not having that piece of the pie that you always felt you were entitled to. So how do I try to combat that individually? First, I'm the mother of 2 young men, so I see how, you know, they move in society, and, you know, there are constant conversations. I think empathy is really the rule number 1 to exercise every day, like try to put yourself in the person's shoes. So in my environment for the last, I mean, obviously I was in the corporate world where women were a minority in the leadership positions, but ever since I went to Equality Now in the early 2000s, I've been constantly surrounded by women, right? I focus on women's issues. Unfortunately, very few men are interested in women's issues or women's equality. Because my specialty is in trafficking, you do see a lot of more men, and they're the ones who get the lion's share of the foundation money, the lion's share of contributions. So we see that, but I also see in my world of women leaders, whenever a man tries to, you know, open the door and come into our area, there's immediate resistance. You know, there's a criticism of him not being equipped to address it, or, you know, again, it's this fear that you are going to start mansplaining, that you will take over. And I think there's again, as Sharon said, we're all individuals and we have to take each person individually, but you always have to have the background of where it comes from. And this is a result of millennia of a system that is meant to oppress women and girls as a class.
And I'd also like to add something to that too, Lori, what Taina said, because there's a big sort of elephant in the room kind of thing when you talk about women. And I'd like to just get that out in the open right now. Women, interestingly enough, suffer from a likability factor. And this is something that's not necessarily a challenge for men. because back to what Taina said about the socialization, when a little girl is born, she's taught to mind her manners and, be the nurturer, the one that plays with the dolls, the one that is the glue of the family. Whereas the men go out, get the big, powerful job, go out there and conquer, you're the breadwinner. And I mean, it's like, rah, 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 it's big cheering on. So the socialization factor of how we're raised, I mean, is huge, because no, women should speak very softly and gently. I mean, some of us are of that generation where our parents, said, oh my God, don't speak so loudly, and these things have an effect on you, whereas the younger generation now, we're not those type of parents. We allow our children to express themselves. We encourage them to assert themselves. We encourage them to have free thought. We encourage them to want to have leadership, to want to do better, and to want to get to the next level. So if you don't have those opportunities within the family structure, because your family structure is really your first initiation to socialization, okay? Then you go to school, and then you go on to your first job, you go to college, all of these things that are where you're on your own and your personality is shaping and you're learning what you like about yourself or what you need to fix about yourself. And I think that it's been very good, the millennial, because women are into their own skin right now. They're feeling their power, their understanding that they have so much to contribute. And it's not necessarily a wait your turn or it's not your time thing, because who's to say whose time is what? You have to feel that within your gut, within your heart, and you also have to have the support system around you that allows for that nurturing, that allows for that expression.
Thank you, Sharon. I wanted to also say that it's interesting, we're talking about, and Taina referenced, the three babies, which is a fascinating experiment, one wearing blue diaper, one wearing pink, one wearing green. I don't know how many people know this, but until the 1950s, pink was for boys and blue was for girls. It was a major department store, I forgot the name, in New York City, that wanted to sell more product. So they switched it around, forcing parents to buy their other colors, and everyone bought into it. So I think it's important to know that things aren't, the way we see things is not the way it always was. And even the idea of colors, I mean, here I am, I have a son and a daughter. I dressed them both in blue. My son turned out gay, my daughter turned out straight. I mean, so, I guess it had nothing to do with the color, surprisingly enough. But so, Mariam, I know you have two young children, a boy and a girl, right? And we're talking about, yes, and your son's name is?
Rumi.
Rumi.
He's named Rumi. He's named
Rumi.
after Jalaluddin Rumi, the Sufi poet from Persia.
Right, so talking about philosophers. And we were talking about how does one build empathy, right? The problem is that we see so many fascist leaders in various countries who we wonder how could they sleep at night, for example, knowing that, children are dying in the streets, or there's poverty, or not, or people are starving. How does one build empathy? For example, you having two young children and having a boy as well. What have you done? What have you and your husband done?
I mean, it's all like, as Taina said and as Sharon said, is that I think what we live in our daily lives, how we function in our daily lives, is not separated from our work. Once we become part of this group that wants more and just an equal world, it becomes something that we need to live on everyday existence. I laugh and I say to a lot of my friends, when I'm looking at my family, like I'm very gendered, set up the way me and my husband function in the house, I take care of the children, I do the laundry, you know, I'm cooking, I'm doing stuff, and he does, you know, all of the housework and all of that stuff. But it's about recognizing and acknowledging how important that is. So what happens a lot of the times is that, yes, we are set up into a certain gender and we grow up, you know, we culturally made, like you said, you know, the whole pink or blue. I don't think the pink and blue in itself, aside from, you know, the whole commercial craze around them, are wrong in a sense, as much as what we're expecting from them is forced on them. It's not a matter of choice. And then when women or young girls or, you know, women grow into a certain set of roles, their second full-time job is not acknowledged and recognized as being, you know, caretakers, as being people who are, you know, keeping the fabric of society together. I think this is where empathy, this is where a collaboration, where our work together as partners in society comes in very, very important, that we need to recognize, and you mentioned this, I think, Diana, you mentioned this about how it is very important that to have equal pay. You mentioned that, Lori, too, is that to have equal pay. I talk always about that mothers who are actually staying home, taking care of the children, need to be considered as a full-time jobbers. This is a big, big responsibility, a big, big job that is not even acknowledged or thanked or seen as important, and women are kind of put into that sector. And even when it comes to like finances and running finances, like running, like whether the family, you know, income or bringing in the income, women are always also sidelined when it comes to income and to money and to managing money and resources, and they get a lot less resources. And I love telling story about this if the time allows me. The UN, I work with the UN. I'm the representative of the Syrian Opposition Coalition to the United Nations. So I deal with the UN a lot, and there's a lot of work that has been done in how to create a more equitable world through the work that the UN done with the, you know, the SG goals, and, you know, how do we make it more women less poor, or give them more resources or more money. So within the UN itself, people have asked that we need to do we need to fix the UN itself, like we need to fix all, you know, politics or governments in the world in order to create a more equitable world anywhere in the world. You need to have more women in decision-making places, and this is what we work on all the time. So the UN created kind of parity when Secretary General Guterres, Antonio Guterres, came into was elected to be the next Secretary General. There was this promise that they're going to create, you know, equitable, high level, you know, that women and men at the UN are going to be at equal level. So they bring in as many women as there are men at the higher positions. But guess what? It was the men who had the higher access to the resources of the UN. The women had the positions where they did not have as much of the budget to run, because the UN has big, large budgets to run, you know, its programs and its spaces. So it was when you looked at the money distribution in how much money were the higher positions at the UN were, and compared to women, it was the men who had the access to more resources to run, to make more decisions about where the money comes. So this is very important to realize, is that when we're talking about creating change, creating a more equitable world, is that who are we giving the power to? Like starting from our homes, from our spaces, and are we acknowledging the value and the thing that women can give us, or all genders, you know, in society can give us, and who are we assigning the power to? Are we doing it tokenism, you know, equality? Are we appreciating women only by talking about it, or are we truly giving them spaces and places where they can make the decisions? I think it's very crucial, and it came in the conversations, you know, with everyone, how resources and access to money, access to power is very important to be given. And that's why I believe very much in quotas, like it has to be actively given to women, to different groups in society, so that we can create that change.
Thank you, Mariam. And I think, Michael, you had a comment that you wanted to.
Just a couple of things. One is to explain the chat room. I want to invite people to post their questions and their comments. Nayelo, thank you for starting us on that route. We will break into small groups, which will give a greater opportunity to discuss this on a smaller scale. Shalai, do you recall when on the agenda when we are Oh, we can do it anytime. She just sent me a message back.
Yes, we can do it anytime. I had us
Oh.
scheduled from 6:45 actually, but since the conversation was going so well, I figured we could wait a bit.
Well, let me just, if I would make my comment from my own observation. My observation of what could be considered women's way of leading, but also optimal way of leading for anybody, men or women, is to acknowledge that it's not just about single people. You know, women, and I think I think the presentations we've heard so far corroborate that, is, you know, women, the American culture, and it's true, of course, in other countries as well, put a spotlight on the individual. And clearly the gains that you've described, and also the gains historically, have been about women's ability to mobilize other women and to bring about a unified voice, whereas the culture, my favorite example is in Central Park, well, not just Central Park, in the parks of New York City, public parks, there are over 450 statues of men and less than 10 of women. And of course, one of those is an imaginary woman, Alice in Wonderland, two imaginary.
Mother Goose and
Mother Goose, two imaginary women.
And don't forget about the dog.
And the dog, thank you. But what was interesting is with the new statue of the suffragettes in Central Park, with a wonderful controversy to say they're not representing the full movement, is one of the few statues in the city of more than one person. So it's simple. So what I'm observing, at least, if you will, that part of women's way of leading, which could also be what men can draw from it, is it's not just about the public figure that's out there. You know, Martin Luther King could not have succeeded in what he did without the support and the engagement of others. He was a mobilizer, but we separate him out. I'd like us to segue into 2 points, if it's all right, Laurie. One is to break out in the groups now and to move us that all our participants are working in the context of nonprofit organizations. And so I'd like you to share your insights. Laurie did a wonderful job up front of mentioning many of the qualities, but I'd like you to share with each other what are the qualities that you either have seen in yourself or you've seen in others in a workplace that make a difference along the lines of this discussion. And Shelley, if we could basically also invite our speakers to include them in working with small groups, if that's all right with you, and we can reconvene in, I'd say, 20 minutes. Is that all right, Laurie?
That works for everyone, yes.
Yeah, okay. So again, everybody's in small groups, and we want to elicit your wisdom in terms of adding to what we've discussed so far as to what are the qualities that either you brought to the table or observed in others that, basically are some of the secrets that we're talking about that should be more public about how women's way of leading is better for both men and women. Okay.
Well, you have to be engaging. You have to be engaging. I said the first thing I would like to offer is a sense of engagement. You know, you have to be open and you have to be able to make people feel comfortable and make people feel that they matter. You have to give people an environment, a base that what they have to say, not necessarily brainstorm, but that their comments are welcome, their contributions are welcome. Because I think oftentimes women tend to be concerned with making people comfortable, with making people engaged and listening to people. Oftentimes we've all been in those rooms, in those meetings where a woman would have said something and nobody listened to it, but then the man comes right behind her and says exactly the same thing that she said. And everybody goes, oh my God, why didn't we think of that before? That's brilliant. But 2 seconds ago, the woman said it, and because either she's not in high regard at the table or, there's a missing ingredient there with whatever her contribution is. I think that's what happens. It's an unevenly stacked deck. So what needs to happen in terms of qualities is people have to be open, and they really have to be honest with themselves, and they have to understand that, when colleagues meet at the table, we're doing so because we have a sense of engagement and wanting to grow and wanting to build from each other, because we're here to solve problems, not to create further dissension.
Sharon, those are wonderful gems. Let me suggest we just carry over the discussion to small groups, and we'll come back as about the whole in 20 minutes. Is that all right?
Sure.
Okay.
That is all right, Michael. I have set up each of the groups so that there'll be one of our wonderful panelists in each room. Michael, could I ask you to repeat the guiding question? I'm going to pop it in the chat so that everybody has it.
Sure. What gems of wisdom have come out of our own experience as both women and men in applying some of the qualities that Lori started out with, and others that may occur to us? How are we being, I think that's the question. Does that make sense?
Yes.
That was off the top of my head. I didn't articulate. But the basic thing is what have you all learned from your own experience as women and men, and also from observing others that you think are positive factors in creating a workplace that is both supportive and encouraging of involvement of women in particular? Fair question.
Okay. Perfect. So we'll open up the chat rooms now. We'll see you all in approximately 20 minutes. Thank you and enjoy. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope that was very, a very fruitful experience for everybody. Let's see, what did we have? We had planned a period of kind of discussion after this, a time to report back, share your takeaways and thoughts, things you heard today that you can immediately operationalize in your own organizations. Does anybody, feel a particularly pressing need to share? You can just turn off your mic and jump in, or you can report it in the chat and I'll read it for you.
I just wanted to first of all say that there seems to be, I know, among those in attendance in our breakout room, it feels there's a level of exhaustion, right? Women for decades have been fighting. We weren't given the right to vote, as I said. We had to fight for it. Women went to prison. They died in the streets to get the right to vote. We're not just going to be handed resources. We're not, but I think it's also important to take stock of the progress we have made. And my 27-year-old daughter reminds me sometimes about that. Mom, do you know you were alive before Black people and white people could get married? I'm like, oh my God. Yes, I'm that old, thank you. But if you look at, we have made progress. Until there's complete and full equality, I know none of us are going to rest. But I think we have to, it's almost like it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? And I think we also have to take stock of the progress we have made and the women before us who have made such significant progress. And we alluded to before how the next generation and the generation after that, young women will be benefiting, and hopefully men, young men will as well. So I think we need to take a step back and say, yes, we've also—
Can I say something about the older generation, Lori?
Is that me or you, or are you including me in that?
Well, I don't know. I'm just, okay. So let's say everybody over 50, okay? I would like to make, this year, I think our generation is the first generation that we didn't have mandatory retirement. And I think that's a very important point, because what happened, instead of people retiring, there's a whole campaign that says, oh, this is ageism. I still feel good. I still have my faculties. I don't have to retire. And it's sort of like, well, there was a reason why these standards were set in Social Security, because it was to bring the next generation along. However, if that space is not open for the next generation to come in, where does the next generation go, and how does the next generation get experience? So I'll leave that as food for thought.
Michael, you're
Yeah,
muted.
sorry, I overmute. Can we make this occasion for folks to report out the gems that they discovered from our conversation? And if I could call on my group first to see, because we were very fortunate to have Sharon in our conversation, and I think it really was, to me, was just so energizing. Just anybody from group, I see some nodding heads. I see Chris, you're nodding your head. Yami,
Sure,
who would like to go?
I'll start by just saying we talked a lot about empathy and using empathy as a way to lead, and that so much of I think what our preconceived notions about what male leadership usually is don't tend to involve empathy. And that's something as a male leader for me, you know, I was telling the group, I've tried to unlearn what I grew up hearing and seeing and what were typically male dominated leadership styles. And that's something that I think if you can replace aggressiveness with empathy, it was something we talked about, you can get, I think, number one, be a better leader, but likely get more out of the people that you're leading as well.
Thank you. Anybody else from the group want to add something as to what their particular takeaways were? I think, Nayela, I see you on the, still on the call, thank heaven. And I think that Sharon really moved the conversation. You know, Women's Way of Leading was a title that just fell into our lap because there was a book written about it. And as Lori and I recall, there was a, Lori, what was Mary Daly's book way back when, Women's Way of Knowing? Do you remember that? Generation. So there was some precedent in this. But what Sharon raised in our group was so mind shaping for me about the title. Sharon, would you share that with the case you were making? It's not women's way of leading, but it's professionalism.
Sure, thank you, Michael. I was saying that in terms of if you're a new person coming into a job situation, and even worse yet, you're the new female manager. I actually had this happen to me when I was at Bronx, Lebanon, and I had 27 people that reported to me, 5 different departments. And people have to understand how to manage your team, how to get the best out of your team. And what I was saying is, as a young person coming in, I mean, one of the people I had was 85 years old, a social worker that reported to me because I had to assign a director of social work. And one of my questions to him was like, wow, 85, are we thinking about retiring, or are we thinking of mentoring others at some point? And this was a gentleman that had been part of the Russian army. So he thought I was insane for asking him that, because he's a leader. He is a boss in his own right. He is somebody that is to be feared. And it's sort of like, well, no, we don't do that, because not only is this a healthcare facility, but we also have to understand you have sick people here. How are we being inclusive? How are we being considerate? How are we being compassionate? And these are the things that all equal professionalism, because you have to be able to communicate, you have to be able to be effective, you have to be able to meet people where they are. So whether you're sweeping the floor in the healthcare facility, or you're the electrical engineer making the generator work, you have to be able to communicate with people at all levels as the manager. And you have to be able to get the best out of your people. So Michael wanted me to make the point that I said, err on the side of professionalism, because you can't go wrong with that. Sometimes people are too casual. You know, managers like to be friends with people that report to them. You have to have strong boundaries. It really doesn't work, because if people don't respect you, you cannot lead.
Nayela, I want to give you the opportunity. If you were to rename this program, what would you and how would you have named it?
I don't know, but again, just for folks who didn't see my chat, and this is not the only panel that I've listened to. It's my Achilles heel when when I see conversations framed as women's leadership, because in my opinion, it continues to perpetuate very sexist stereotypes, be it rooted in social construction and socialization. Yes, you've acknowledged that, but again, you know, I find it troubling that when conversations that are as important as this are simplified and framed in ways that don't capture that nuances of women can lead in very masculine ways, but again, acknowledging that social construction, that masculinity, again, is, you know, it's a social construction. You know, society says that empathy is not a masculine way of leading, right? But there are very, you know, I know a lot of men, transgendered and cisgendered, who are very empathetic, right? And that manifests in their leadership. So I don't necessarily have a specific name, but I do think conversations like these, you know, should be considered in a different way, again, because I think as long as we continue to put quote unquote women's leadership as a framework, then women, we are confined to whatever that framework expects of us, right? I identify, well, I am a cisgendered woman, but I don't necessarily, you know, my go-to leadership is not necessarily, you know, I think the ways that are considered feminine, right? And that goes back to my socialization is, you know, military background, very individualized. To Sharon's point, I definitely adapt to accommodate team members' needs, but like, again, I don't have an answer to that question, Michael. I just, for me, it does not do conversations that require nuance and depth any favors when we simplify all the different ways that leadership can manifest in ourselves, regardless of what gender we are, by simplifying these conversations into a simple narrative as women's leadership, because that manifests in so many different ways. And women's leadership does not create space for us to have those conversations that capture all those different dynamics, in my opinion.
Well, thank you. That's a very important contribution. Do any of our guest speakers, oh, I see Taina has hand up. You want to weigh in?
Yes, I think, you know, I fully understand these concerns, and I think it goes back to we're all individuals, we're all human beings, and how do we navigate whatever, work, personal relationships, being in the world. However, I think the reason why we still need, or, you know, these conversations need to happen is similar to the Black Lives Matter construct. You know, when people say, but all lives matter. Well, yes, all lives matter. But the reason why we say Black Lives Matter is because Black lives don't matter. And it's the same thing with women. When there are 5 billion of us or 4.5 billion of us in the world, where 1 out of 3 will have experienced sexual violence, abuse. We don't own the streets. There's not one country in the world where women aren't raped or don't fear being raped. We don't get equal pay. I mean, the list is long. So until we are equal, we have to have these conversations about women's leadership and women's spaces and all that, because, and I quote the, you know, illustrious Professor Catherine McKinnon, who developed the legal theory of sex and equality. And she has a book entitled, Are Women Human? And that's a question that is still very much alive in everything, in our policies, in our culture, not just here in the United States, but around the world. I think we wouldn't have these conversations if women were deemed full human beings that are worthy of a life of dignity and equality and a life free of violence and discrimination. And so, yes, right now, because we live in such an individualistic society, and it's like, well, I am, therefore I am, that's fine, but it can't be divorced from the whole conversation. And I do think that, you know, this Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter conversation can maybe guide us, because when it comes to women's issues, a lot of the conversations that we have around race or or ethnic discrimination kind of goes out the door. That's my 2 cents.
Lori, I see you shaking your head. Did you want to add anything to the conversation, this issue?
Well, actually, I was nodding my head, but yeah, well, everything that Taina was just saying, I agree with. Wouldn't it be lovely, just so wonderful, where we could focus on individual traits, but not place them in a gender lens in any way, where there's full equality, so we could focus on individuals regardless of sex, race, orientation, right? All of that. We don't live in that world yet. We don't live in that society yet. So the importance, that's why there's this push to have more women in office, for example, to hold elected office, because we need the ways that their views, how they look at situations and crises and laws and how it affects women particularly. Until we have full equality, that's what we need. And hopefully, it won't be in my lifetime, I know that, but hopefully one day we could move on and not have to focus on the differences in one's sex rights due to one's biological sex or chosen sex. Mm-hmm.
One of the things I'd like to add is that what thrills me about our work in the nonprofit sector and social movements is we keep on creating new language. West Side Story is coming back to Broadway when Broadway opens. And in it, you'll see what we refer to young people in the 1950s and 60s. They were juvenile delinquents. We were looking at social problems through the lenses of these people have problems, but not society has problems. So what I really love this conversation. And what Sharon did, I thought was fascinating to me. She said, this is not separate. This is what professionalism is. So she's reclaiming, she's saying that what we're talking about are elements of excellent leadership should be viewed as professionalism in the workplace. So you've begun to, in my head, change my language to saying,
And Michael, this was so, I really appreciate that you understood and you knew exactly where I was going with it, because it's sort of like education is not a Black thing or a white thing, it's education, okay? And either you have it or you don't. Professionalism, sometimes women feel like the bar is too low or too high or whatever it is. And there are women who we elect out there and are to lead us, but they don't understand or they don't feel that they are representing women or representing everybody. And no, part of the reason why you were elected is because you had a woman's platform or you had something that you were saying to women, especially if women voted for you in landmark numbers. And people have to, it's like the same thing with Chris, meeting people where they are, okay? If you don't do right by people, they're not going to do right by you. And this is why consistency, professionalism, all of these things are so important, because we really need to have these conscientious conversations in order to get to next. Lori Sokol was right. Nayela had good points, but we're just not there yet. And we're trying to incrementally get there.
Thank you. I want to, with the limited time we have left, I want to tap into the wisdom from other groups. We've heard from one group. Anybody else willing to share what their takeaway will be from the discussion that they think kind of set a light bulb off? Now, Deborah, I know you always have something to say. And you have a great experience also as a manager of many people. Deborah, did you want to weigh in from what you heard?
I spoke so much during our breakouts. I wanted to let others talk. Well, there was one particular thing that Mariam had mentioned, and that was about this method of leadership by forming a cohort of women. And I believe she identified that there was 7 women in the way her organization decided to deliver leadership. And that that is just amazing to me. That concept has not been adopted by men, but it just seems like it's to allow so many, first of all, she talked about, identifying perhaps a new 5 is good or 7 is good. Like, what's the magic number where you can actually get things done? Because when you have too many people in the room, you can't make any decisions. So there has to be that sort of that perfect number. But that concept of not saying, okay, I am the supreme leader of all this stuff, the one, and instead saying, we are the leadership. We are the decision makers. We will combine our thoughts, our feelings, what we consider to be important to all of us, and make decisions on that platform. That to me is just very profound, and it's amazing. And we're not set up or structured to do anything like that in the way our corporate world is, or nonprofit world, as a matter of fact, is set up.
Thank you so much. Anybody else, either our guest speakers and faculty or fellows, want to add in terms of what are some of the thoughts you'll take back to your own offices? Andrew, I see you up there too. Okay. Anybody else want to weigh in? Just
say something. I was in group 1, and I think I'm sorry if I say your name wrong, but May had said something that was really profound and really resonated with us, and that's that women so often were put in a position to compete with each other, and that really we should, sometimes the patriarchy itself pits us against each other to compete, and that we should really just lift each other up and know that as women we have each other's back. And I think that really meant something to our group.
I live in a male-driven academic environment, and I can tell you I've never been around so many male egos in my entire career. That it's, where I witnessed faculty members coming to me, well, I haven't read the materials, but this is what I think, which is such an insult to people who prepared the materials. They're quick to, and I think it's partly, given I'm not an academic for most of my life, it's partly a disease that academia spreads, because as we say, we have to move forward as organizations, we have to move together as a group. And I think I hear that in the conversations everybody's having today. Thank you, Emily. Anybody else want to add a closing comment?
I do. So I wanted people to know, when I didn't get the chance to introduce myself, but one of the things that I want people to know is that I have a 10-channel internet television network called Crew TV. And one of the things we look for is content creators, because we're interested in having more conversations about social justice, about civil rights, about women's advocacy and civic engagement. So if any of you are interested in or are artists or video content creators, I'd like to have a dialogue with you and talk more about how can we do this in a way that is productive, because there's so many voices and so many opportunities now.
Sharon, can we'd love to include information about that in our follow-up mailing. Is that all right?
Absolutely, absolutely. The app is available via app. It's available via all smartphones. It's called Crew TV, CREW TV. And you can search for it in the App Store. We're on Amazon Fire, Apple TV, and Roku.
Would anybody else from our faculty for the evening want to weigh in on final thoughts that you might have? Mariam, do you have final thoughts you want to add?
Thank you for that. I wanted to go back to what Deborah a little bit said about the, we doing a leadership that's not led just by one person. Being this a feminine trait is that one of the things also that she talked about herself and we talked about in the group is that being, and maybe Naila alluded to that, the whole idea about what makes a feminine or masculine or a feminine or a woman leadership is that it's attributes. It's not necessarily needs to be ascribed to a certain gender, but we do get always better results from people by having empathy, by having nobody coerced to do anything does it with the same passion and love as when they're convinced to do something, as when they love to do something, and that cannot be had by coercion. And I believe this is a very big lesson for us to learn, you know, from the world, that whenever you lead with empathy, whenever you lead with love, which a lot of women leaders in the world just happen to be women, have shown, you know, and I'm pretty sure there are a lot of men who have done some good job also in leading their nations, but there is so much that we could have by being loving and empathetic and sympathetic and having a gentle connection to other people, and not being, you know, the one who's at the top and just telling people to do, like giving orders. It shouldn't be like that.
We haven't touched that much on tactics at a previous leadership conversation, but way back when we had the president of the Ms. Foundation for Women speaking, and what I found such a fascinating tactic was she said, when I interview people for jobs here, I ask them where they want to be in 5 years so I can support them towards that goal. And I thought that was what a breaking the ice idea, that she's immediately establishing herself as someone who wants to grow her staff and, you know, and help each staff member fulfill their greatest potential. So we haven't gotten into that level of conversation tonight, which I think maybe a session, Lori, maybe a subsequent session that we might have.
You know, what that reminds me of, and mentioned, of course, the Ms. Foundation for Women, I assume Teresa Younger.
Yes, it was, yes.
As we know, you know, Gloria Steinem is one of the founders of that organization as well. And she says, one of the things she says is, imagine if we were linked, not ranked. Right. So if we were linked together equally, not ranked in terms of a hierarchy, that's what you're talking about. And that's obviously what Teresa and her organization follow as well.
Where we're closing in, I want to have Shelley last word for announcements. But before that, Lori, I hope this will be an indicator that we have a lot more to talk about in the future, and we can join together. It's a wonderful collaboration, and it's the first collaboration we've ever had on a leadership conversation, and you've really raised us to a whole new level of sharing. And I want to say also to our fellows and other guests, you're going to create the next generation of language. You all are wordsmiths. And sometimes you won't know when you're doing it. So we look to you not only to be able to build on the wisdom and talent you already have, but to change the course. And one way of changing the course is changing the language. And I have to say that I get angry with the corporate sector, because I think the terms mentoring, flat organizations, networking came from the nonprofit and social movement world. You know, we didn't call it that, but, you know, it goes back, and I could give a whole lecture on it, but I'm not going to do that. So, Laurie, is there any last words you want to add before we hand it over to Shelley?
Well, first, I'd like to thank everyone, panelists, of course, for participating, you, Michael, and your, you know, department for putting this all together, and everyone who attended. And I particularly tapping into the use of language, I think cannot be overstated. It all comes down to naming things, right? And how language is used to, you know, represent others, represent ourselves, right? And topics and ideas. So I think the importance of language, I guess, well, it's just extremely important. So thank you, Michael, for bringing that up.
Thank you. Shelley, do you want to, maybe we could also, if you didn't realize it or may not have known, I know it's generational partly. Mariam Makeba was an outstanding anti-apartheid leader, and the title of the song is just really appropriate to the session. So after Shelley finishes her, gives us a send-off, well, Shelley, can we put it back on?
Sure, I will pull it back up while I'm speaking. So thank you all so much for attending tonight's event. I know it's been a long session and then we had much to talk about in the breakout rooms and in the general discussion. Hope you are all feeling enriched and empowered. Enriched and empowered, a good way to end the day. We will be reaching out with a recording of this event, as well as future information about panels that we'll be holding, either in conjunction with Women's eNews or with other partnerships. So thank you all so much. Michael, any last words before I put up the song once more?
Just about the readings we're going to send out.
Oh, the readings. Yes, we will have those. I don't have the list on me right now, I'm afraid, Michael, but I will put it together and we'll send it out.
Are you giving us homework? I mean, do we have homework?
No. This is just for those who want to kind of, the summer is supposed to be, they say, good time for reading, but not in the nonprofit field because we're working as hard every day as we do in the rest of the year. But if people, for whatever reasons, want to dig deeper, some of our fellows in the last Friday recommended, I don't remember the authors, of course, Audre Lorde was one. Do you remember, Shelley, who the other two writers were that came from the fellows' suggestions? If not, we'll send them out.
We'll send them out, yeah.
Yeah. So this has been a joy and a thrill, and those of you who are not fellows who joined in, you'll be added to our mailing list, and so will our speakers. We don't want to lose contact with you, and want to make sure you continue to be part of our lives, and that we thank Lori in particular for enlisting you all in this very special evening that we've had. We'll have others coming up, and so be well, believe in yourself. We believe in you, and we know that you are tomorrow's champions of the kind of social justice that we're working for today, and you continue that role. So we'll let Mariam Akiba have the last word, and catch on, because I know it's not she just explains the English title of the song in the beginning, so I want you to make particular note of that. And but she's talking about us and our mothers and our daughters and our nieces and our nephews, in my case, my two goddaughters, and as well as men and people of all backgrounds and gender. So let's go.
Kauleza is a South African song. It comes from the townships, locations, reservations, whichever, near the cities of South Africa, where all the black South Africans live. The children shout from the streets as they see police cars coming to raid their homes for one thing or another. They say, "Kauleza, mama," which simply means, "Hurry, mama, please, please don't let them catch you." Kauleza, mama, kauleza, mama, kauleza, mama, kauleza, mama, kauleza, mama, sheshi sabo. Naga mapoisa zongene ndini mama, bati kauleza, mama. Naga mapoisa zongene ndini mama, bati sheshi sabo. Jonga, 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 yo kauleza, mama, iye, mama. Bati jonga, 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 yo kauleza, mama, iye, mama. Oh, na, kama poisa zongene ndini mama, bati kauleza, mama. Yeah, I'm a love.